This morning, the committee is convening Conduct Oversight of the Bureau of Land Management, also known as BLM, which is situated within the Department of the Interior. I'd like to welcome Director Stowe Manning back to the committee, and thank you for joining us this morning. I also sit on the Armed Services Committee, which you know, and that's where I'm going to be going to. Though West Virginia has very little BLM managed lands as compared to other states, as chairman of this committee, and as an American, I'm always astonished at how much land in the United States is managed by the federal government, especially in the western states. My sympathy to all of you.
Thank you.
In total, the BLM is responsible for more than 1 in every 10 acres of land in the United States, and approximately 30% of the nation's minerals. That's approximately 245 million acres of surface land and 700 million acres of subsurface mineral estate. This land, together with all the natural resources and beauties, is owned by the American people, and it has been entrusted to the BLM to sustain its health, diversity, and productivity for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. This includes managing wildfires and drought and protecting and restoring watersheds, native and recreational fisheries, and ecosystems across BLM-managed lands. BLM also plays a significant role in providing for our nation's energy and mineral security. Roughly 10% of U.S. oil and gas production occurs on BLM-managed lands. In fiscal year 23, we produced 516 million barrels of oil from federal onshore lands, 3.7 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. This is why it is so important that the Inflation Reduction Act ensured onshore oil and gas leasing will continue by tying BLM's authority to issue rights-of-way for solar and wind projects to whether substantial oil and gas lease sales are also occurring in public lands. And really what it's about is an all-in energy policy, using everything we have in the cleanest fashion. And we're producing this energy more cleanly than ever while also addressing the legacy impact on our energy communities through initiatives like the $4.7 billion of Congress provided in the infrastructure law for the Orphan Well program, which is managed by the BLM. I was also pleased to see the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals earlier this year finally overturn the executive branch's decade-long moratorium on new federal coal leasing, giving that nearly 40% of our nation's coal comes from the Powder River Basin in Wyoming and Montana, much of its BLM-managed lands. But unfortunately, the BLM quickly followed that up by choosing no more coal leasing as their preferred option on those federal lands. I guess when you look at the regulations this administration is putting out, it's clear they think that coal won't be needed anymore, which I disagree with, respectfully. But I'm here to tell you what it's actually doing is putting our grid reliability at risk right now. And the problems aren't limited to fossil fuels. The administration doesn't want to talk about that. There's nearly a 300-mile transmission project across Oregon and Idaho that's been trying for over 18 years to get permitted and constructed. When complete, the 500 kilovolt line would deliver badly needed energy and increase reliability to the nation's electric grid. But just when the developer thought they were about to cross the finish line, BLM decided to restart the previously completed cultural and historical surveys. I've heard similar challenges with geothermal developers, where nearly 30% of their capital is tied to just environmental reviews. They simply cannot afford to be stuck in the endless permitting nightmare while their remaining financial support rides on whether they can ever obtain a permit to start their commercial operations to produce geothermal energy. To show how bad the problem is, this chart behind me is based on work from Stanford University and looked at every single environmental impact statement completed from 2010 to 2018 across the entire federal government. The BLM led more of these EISs than any other agency. Stanford found that solar is the most frequently litigated and canceled project type, with wind a close second in terms of cancellation. In almost all of these cases, the litigants were environmental groups. As evidenced by the research from Stanford, comments submitted to BLM's regulations and feedback I've heard directly from developers, and it is clear there remains a major challenging permitting energy projects on BLM-managed lands, regardless, and I say that again, regardless of the type of energy that will be produced. Unfortunately, the situation for critical minerals on public lands is just as bad. Put that up again, if you will. I don't know if kind of moving around, if you all have been able to see where it's coming from, what's been litigated and what's been canceled. And it's astonishing, and I think people don't realize we all need permitting reform. And some people think, well, it helps one group more than the other, and it really doesn't. It basically levels the playing field so we can have reliable energy and a grid system that works. Some estimates say that more than 300 new mines will be needed in order to meet projected demand for critical minerals. According to the International Energy Agency, demand for electricity vehicle batteries will increase from around 340 gigawatt hours today to over 3,500 gigawatt hours by 2030, requiring as many as 50 new lithium mines, 41 new nickel mines, and 11 new cobalt mines. This demand simply cannot be met through recycling alone, and new mines must be built in the U.S. and on BLM-managed lands. We directed the BLM and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to provide us with a report on how we can do that and how we can improve and expedite the permitting around our domestic critical mineral supply chain. The report we received, which was many months late, recognized the hard truth that demand for critical minerals will at least double by 2040, but then it clearly failed to meet the requirements set by Congress. It barely contained any concrete recommendations to actually accelerate mine permitting. Instead, it calls for more regulations, more staff, more funding, less mining, wherever BLM believes permitting will take longer, and multi-year effort to completely overhaul the entire mining regulatory system. The report was so bad, in fact, that Interior's own Inspector General found the department failed to meet Congress's direction and instructed Interior to provide the additional legally required information. We really need you to do better. Director Stone Manning, I fully appreciate your responsibility to manage our nation's precious resources. I also implore you not to forget your role in our nation's economic and energy security. Now I'm going to recognize Senator Brasso for his opening statement.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this important hearing. Look, this is the first time that Ms. Stone Manning has appeared before the committee in 3 years. The Director of Bureau of Land Management has a profound impact on the people of my home state in Wyoming. I saw it and heard about it last weekend in Wyoming as I met with the Wyoming Mining Association and with the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, our ranchers. Heard about it again last night on a conference call with each of our Wyoming County commissioners from each and every one of our 23 counties. And it's because nearly half of the land in Wyoming is owned by the federal government, and nearly 70% of the minerals in Wyoming are owned by the federal government. And the director manages most of this land. In Wyoming, the director's decisions have a significant effect on people's jobs, on their family budgets, on the quality of public education, and on our entire state's economy. That is why I find Ms. Stone Manning's record and her unwillingness to appear before us until now so very troubling. Since 2021, Ms. Stone Manning has been busy making decisions which will crush Wyoming's economy and lay waste to our local communities in the years ahead, and the examples abound. In August of 2023, the Bureau's Rock Springs Field Office issued a resource management plan that would devastate communities in southwest Wyoming. This is the home of some of the nation's largest deposits of natural gas and a mineral called trona. These resources support tens of thousands of good-paying jobs. Under this plan, the Bureau would lock up over 2 million acres of federal land from productive use. It would prohibit future energy and mineral development, prohibit grazing, and even recreation. Recreation. The governor, the state legislature, our entire congressional delegation, and the county commissioners all strongly oppose the Bureau's plan. We know what will happen if the plan goes forward. The director is making similar decisions in other parts of our state. Last month, the Buffalo Field Office issued a proposal to end new coal leasing in the Powder River Basin. Last year, the Powder River Basin supplied 45% of all of the coal mined in the United States of America. Wyoming's coal production is the lifeblood of Gillette and Northeast Wyoming. It supports tens of thousands of jobs. It helps fund K-12 public education in our state. And there is absolutely no reason to pursue this irresponsible and irrational proposal. We all know that President Biden wants a carbon-free grid. As of now, this is a pipe dream. And according to experts the world over, without an extraordinary technological breakthrough, it will likely never happen. Never. In the meantime, we must not block access to the nation's single richest area of abundant, available, and reliable energy. The Bureau is also wreaking havoc in other areas of the state. In March of this year, the Bureau issued a resource management plan to address the greater sage grouse. For over 15 years, the state of Wyoming has been at the forefront of efforts to protect the species and conserve and restore its habitat. Wyoming has done so while balancing the need for economic development. The Bureau is now proposing to undo Wyoming's efforts and block access to millions of acres of federal land. The list goes on. In April, the Bureau finalized its so-called public lands rule. This rule turns multiple use, the Bureau's decades-old bedrock principle of federal land management, turns it on its head. It will allow third parties to lease federal lands in order to block the productive use of the land. This is land which by law is to be used for grazing, for energy, for mineral development, and for recreation. Again, families and communities in Wyoming and throughout the West depend on federal lands for energy and mineral development, for grazing, for forest management, and for recreation. Multiple use is enshrined in federal law, yet Ms. Stone Manning is attempting to repeal it all on her own. If this weren't enough, Ms. Stone Manning is also sabotaging her own Bureau's oil and gas program. She has failed to hold quarterly lease sales, she has nearly tripled timelines for permits, and she has refused to deliver leases to the winning bidders. She has issued a series of regulations to make it prohibitively expensive to explore and produce on federal lands. None of this should surprise us. I fought her nomination because Ms. Stone Manning has long shown her hostility to the people of this country who live near and depend on federal lands. And I'm glad today that the committee will finally call her to account. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Stone Manning.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, I'm Tracy Stone Manning, and I have the honor of serving as the Director of the Bureau of Land Management. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the priorities and mission of the BLM. We are the nation's largest land manager, responsible for 1 in 10 acres in this country. The multiple use, sustained yield mission established by the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, or FLPMA, directs us to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of 245 million acres of public lands and 700 million acres of the mineral estate for multiple uses. These lands provide food, fiber, minerals, energy, clean water, habitat, and lifetime memories for countless families. We owe a great deal of gratitude to the nearly 10,000 BLM civil service employees that do the hard work day in and day out of balancing our mission. New and growing challenges over the past few decades have made it more difficult for the BLM to achieve this careful balancing of the many resources and uses of public lands and what they offer to all Americans. As the stewards for more land than any other agency, we've experienced increasingly negative effects associated with climate change, including extreme drought, elevated and longer fire seasons, and greater disruption to sensitive species of wildlife and plants. To address these challenges, the BLM aims to prioritize landscape health in order to ensure that our public lands can provide the countless resources and experiences that they always have. While the BLM has taken many actions to prioritize landscape health during this administration, I'm going to focus on 2: restoring public lands and waters and facilitating the transition to a clean energy economy. Prioritizing landscape health means ensuring future generations inherit public lands as good or in better shape than we found them. It means making public lands more resilient to the impacts of climate change. It means fulfilling our mission. Healthy, resilient landscapes sustain numerous communities and economies, and they are essential to the BLM's ability to manage public lands for multiple use and sustained yield. The BLM is working to improve the health of our lands and waters and enhance overall ecosystem function through key regulatory updates that will help safeguard the health of public lands and waters for current and future generations. We're also making historic investments on the ground for land and water restoration. Last month, the BLM finalized the Public Lands Rule, which will help guide balanced management of public lands. This important rule provides tools for the BLM to help improve the health and resilience of public lands in the face of a changing climate, conserve important wildlife habitat and intact landscapes, and facilitate responsible development, and better recognize unique cultural and natural resources on our public lands. The BLM's efforts to prioritize the health of our public lands and waters also includes historic on-the-ground investments. As part of President Biden's Investing in America agenda, the BLM has identified 21 large landscapes across the West for targeted efforts to restore degraded or damaged public land resources. These efforts include restoring wildlife habitat in the sagebrush steppe of the high desert, recreating wetland meadows, and repairing watersheds on former industrial timberlands, just among many other projects. As we work to keep public lands and waters resilient from the effects of a changing climate, we must ensure we do our part to help reduce carbon pollution and other greenhouse gas emissions, the primary drivers of climate change impacts to our public lands. President Biden has asked us to ensure an electricity sector free of carbon pollution by 2035 and economy-wide by 2050, and our public lands play an important role in that work. During this administration, the BLM has approved over 7.3 gigawatts of renewable energy projects, helping to surpass the administration's goals of permitting 25 gigawatts of clean energy projects on public lands by 2025. To help foster this work, the BLM finalized the Renewable Energy Rule last month, which will help guide where renewable energy development occurs, improve project application processes, and incentivize developers to continue responsibly developing solar and wind projects on our public lands. While the BLM has made great progress transitioning to the clean energy future, oil and gas production continues to be a substantial part of BLM's energy portfolio. Our work, which has included the first comprehensive update to our oil and gas leasing regulations in many decades, has ensured that conventional energy development is as environmentally responsible as possible and that it provides a fair return to the American taxpayer. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the important work the Bureau is undertaking to manage the nation's public lands for present and future generations. I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony, and I want to start by just thanking you and all the employees at the BLM for your stewardship of places that are particularly important to my constituents, from the Rio Grande del Norte National Monument to the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks, Cabazon Wilderness Study Area to Chama River Canyon. The BLM manages some of the places that New Mexicans have the most identity with and most pride with. And then I want to thank you for your work on permitting transmission and renewable energy projects. The Arizona and New Mexico offices of the BLM have been critical in moving the SunZia project forward. And for a little context, SunZia is going to facilitate about 3.5 gigawatts of clean energy onto the grid. That's bigger than the Hoover Dam. That's the single biggest renewable energy project ever built in the Western Hemisphere, and it would not have been possible without the employees at the BLM. Can you tell us a little bit about, we've heard a lot of hyperbole about the Public Lands Rule. Talk about how the Public Lands Rule fits into the multiple use mandate of the Bureau of Land Management.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. The Public Lands Rule is going to help BLM build and maintain the health of public lands in 3 important ways. It's going to ensure that we protect the most intact landscapes, it's going to help us restore the degraded lands that need it, and it's going to help us make wise decisions across our development portfolio that's backed by data and science to make those decisions durable. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act, as you know, tells us to do many things. And in those multiple uses, it tells us to manage for fish and wildlife habitat, for conservation, for natural and scenic values. FLPMA tells us to do these things, and for the first time, we're going to put some consistency to how we deliver the conservation part of FLPMA's charge to us.
Great. Yeah, I don't think it's too much to ask that the BLM manage for fish and wildlife habitat.
Yeah.
That is something near and dear to many of my constituents. I hear more and more from tribes in New Mexico who want to help care for and steward public lands alongside federal agencies, including the Bureau of Land Management. And I know the BLM and the Forest Service are working with Tesuque Pueblo on an agreement for the Caja del Rio area. I believe you met with Tesuque leadership when you were in New Mexico last month. Can you give us a little update on those discussions?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I did meet with the Tesuque Pueblo here in D.C., actually, but I have been out on the Caja and recognized the need for us to work together to improve that habitat and maintain that incredible connectivity that it delivers to New Mexicans. I'm confident that we are going to soon sign a co-stewardship agreement with the Tesuque and the Forest Service so that we can manage these lands together.
Great. We're seeing delays in project approvals for projects on BLM land in New Mexico, and very frequently I think the cause is a lack of sufficient realty staff to finalize things like rights-of-way, land acquisition, surveys. It's an issue that dogs the Forest Service as well, but this affects everything from recreation to land exchanges to renewable energy development. What can we be doing to get more staff at the BLM offices in New Mexico that we can speed up these project approvals?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for that question. Hiring realty specialists for people watching online, we're hiring, is really vexing across our portfolio, across all of our states. But I'm pleased to tell you that when we came in January of 2021, there was roughly 8,800 BLM employees. We are typically land between 10,000 and 10,500. We've made great progress. We're over 9,600 now, so we're getting there and rebuilding to the place that BLM career employees deserve and the country deserves. We're using every tool in the toolbox to try and specifically target realty specialists, and could use any ideas would be welcome.
I want to, before my time's expired, I just want to touch on one other thing, which is the Legacy Restoration Fund. Those are the Great American Outdoors Act funds. The Bureau has only obligated 69% of the funds in the 3-year window. How can we be getting more deferred maintenance dollars out the door and onto the ground for everything from campgrounds to all the other infrastructure that supports the public on our BLM lands?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Senator. As you know, deferred maintenance projects are multi-year projects. They take some running time. We have dozens and dozens in the pipeline now, and I can get you those specific numbers, but I'm feeling pretty good that we're going to catch up, and hopefully the Congress will reauthorize the Great American Outdoors Act. So now that we've got a pipeline, we can continue to fund those projects.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Stoneman, the Bureau's Rock Springs Resource Management Plan will devastate the people of Southwest Wyoming, lock up millions of acres of land, local communities, the entire state relies on those lands. The governor, state legislature, county commissioners, local communities all strongly oppose this plan. So why are you ignoring Wyoming's opposition to the plan across the board?
Senator, thanks for the question. As you know, the Rock Springs plan there's a draft out. There was a public comment period. There was a lot of hyperbole about facts that were not true about the plan. So we've done a lot of education work with your constituents about what's in the plan. More importantly, we extended the public comment period and worked with the governor. He stood up a task force, and those folks got to walk in the shoes of our BLM field staff in Rock Springs to give us recommendations for the final. We're digging in, looking at those recommendations, and I am certain that Wyomingites will see their voices reflected in the final.
Well, I just hope the BLM does not dig in, but actually reverses course on this issue. Last month, the Bureau took steps to prohibit coal leasing in the Powder River Basin. The Bureau claims that coal production in the region won't be impacted until the year 2038, so 14 years from now. The Bureau claims that existing leases are sufficient to meet expected demand for coal. My question then is, why is the Bureau taking this action now if you don't say it's going to have any impact for at least 14 years?
Senator, thanks for the question. As you know, the President has asked us to turn and transition to a clean energy economy. The lands in the Powder River Basin are leased through 2041. And so you see the draft or the final before you. The record of decision is still in formulation.
Well, I'd point out that the front page story in the New York Times not too long ago pointed out that this president's pipe dream is not actually something that can be possibly done in our country and our needs for energy, as the committee hearings have shown again and again and again. I think this plan is completely reckless. Last year, the Powder River Basin supplied 45% of all the coal mined in the United States, and if this carbon-free grid doesn't materialize, and I don't believe it will, what do? You suggest that we start importing coal from China and other places?
Senator, I have great faith in the ingenuity of the American people. We are hard at work every day. We have permitted 7.9 gigawatts in just 3.5 years. I believe we can reach the transition the President has asked us to reach.
Well, I agree that in the ingenuity of the American people, it's really hard when your agency continues to block efforts to produce the critical minerals that we need and so much of the product that we need for the American economy. So in April, your Bureau issued a rule that will dramatically raise bonding requirements on oil and gas producers. This is money that producers must pay up front in order to operate on federal lands. According to the data from your own department, there were only 37 abandoned wells on lands managed by the Bureau. It's less than 0.1% of all the wells that the Bureau manages. So how do you justify your decision to increase bonding requirements by as much as 25-fold?
Senator, both the Government Accountability Office and the Inspector General have written reports that suggest, I think rightly so, that our bonding rates, which are over 60 years old, are not high enough. We have thousands of idled wells on our public lands, and idled wells are the last stop before they become orphaned. Not all of them become orphaned, but the GAO found that thousands of them will.
Yeah, well, I don't buy it. This rule to me is completely arbitrary, it's punitive, and you're trying to drive oil and gas producers off federal land. I think it's disgraceful. Finally, in my remaining time, Wyoming is home to the large population of greater sage grouse and its habitat. For over 15 years, with Republican governors, Democrat governors working together, Wyoming has been at the forefront of adopting new management approaches to protect the species. Instead of working with Wyoming, your Bureau plans to upend the state's successful efforts at balancing conservation with economic development. Why are you ignoring a state that has proven time and again that it can successfully protect the species?
Senator, respectfully, I have a different view on our work with your state. We've been meeting twice weekly with the state of Wyoming as we develop the sage grouse plans. The only way to make these plans work is to work together with our partners in the states, and we have been doing so, and Wyoming has been helping us lead the way with the sage grouse task force at WGA. We are literally line editing the documents together, so I believe that they are going to have the durability that they need for success for the sage grouse.
Yeah, John Kennedy spoke at the University of Wyoming in 1963, and it was part of his tour of conservation in the West. And he said, we need to maintain a living balance between man's actions and nature's reactions. I have a picture of him giving that speech. Tom Udall's dad, who was Secretary of Interior, was with him that day in Wyoming, and it just seems that the BLM has gone a long way away from maintaining a living balance and basically trying to shut down the state of Wyoming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Director, thank you for being here. I have to say, I do agree with former President Kennedy as well as our ranking member. We need to maintain a living balance. And that's why I appreciate you working with us, particularly in Nevada, because you know the footprint BLM has in Nevada. I do want to talk a little bit about the resource management plan modernization in Nevada for that reason, because I think this is part of that living balance. Last year, I sent a letter supporting efforts by BLM's state office in Nevada at undertaking that statewide resource management plan to allow for a comprehensive science-based approach to determine management for BLM lands across the whole state, and would thus be able to incorporate entire ecoregions, competing land use needs, and varied stakeholders. The effort is important, as you well know, in Nevada, because there's about 48 million acres of BLM managed land in my state. That's 3/5 of Nevada's total land mass. And currently, there are 12 resource management plans in effect, and with some completed over 36 years ago. These plans are out of date. They're impacting BLM's multiple use management mission across Nevada. Several rules are being processed at the department level that have significant impact to how the lands are managed in my state, which is very confusing for our state, local users, our local stakeholders, and local governments, including, let me just name a few, the oil and gas leasing rule, the solar PIS, the public lands rule. I can go on and on. There's over 12 of them. So I've been asking this, and I hope your answer today is similar to, at the end of the day, what I'm looking for is an alignment of all of this so that our stakeholders know what to anticipate. And so my question for you is how are you managing the alignment for these nationwide rules with the particular needs in my state and other Western states that are dealing with these as well?
Senator, thank you for the question, and it gets at the sort of through line to our work, which is managing for landscape health and doing so in a responsible way that is fair to the American taxpayer. So you'll see how the renewable energy rule, for example, lists priority criteria for helping to drive where development goes. It incentivizes that development by dropping fees by 80%. That, coupled with the public lands rule that ups our game on using science and data to inform our decision-making, to make those decisions more durable, those then would be driven by resource management plans that allocate uses across the landscape. And so I think that the statewide RMP for Nevada is, I'm hoping it will be a model for the BLM. We've not done that anywhere else where we have one big overarching RMP. And so we're committed to seeing that through and perhaps having Nevada lead the way like it is on renewable energy.
Do you have a time frame on anticipate when that's going to be done?
These processes take time, and we are behind. I inherited a backlog, tens of millions of dollars of backlog of planning, but it's in the mix, and it's a priority, so it will be moving forward here.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Just keep in mind, all of the clean energy projects, the economic development, the environmental protection, all of the above is put on hold at times, waiting for BLM to respond in this resource management guide that I think is important for the reasons that you've just said.
Yeah, and the chart that the chairman held up earlier, I mean, if we have up-to-date resource management plans, that makes our decisions more durable.
Mm-hmm. Let me jump really quickly to protecting Ash Meadows. Ash Meadows in southern Nevada is a national wildlife refuge and the Devil's Hole unit of Death Valley National Park in Nye County. Mm-hmm. It's a spectacular resource. The fish there is being threatened by a proposal to drill into the sensitive groundwater, which would dry up seeps and springs that are at the core of the refuge. I toured this last month, and let me just say, every community leader that lives in that area, they're unanimous to see the department move forward with a withdrawal as quickly as possible, land withdrawal, to protect this area. Now, I get that Ash Meadows is managed by a different agency, but the withdrawal comes within BLM's responsibility. Can I get your commitment to work with me and our constituents in working on that withdrawal to protect not only the fish there, but that whole wildlife refuge?
Yeah, Senator, I commit to you that I'm going to come and visit it and learn about it firsthand so that I can speak with the Secretary about it. She, of course, is the person who has the authority to do mineral withdrawals, but I commit to you that I will dig in and learn about this issue.
And then finally, I'm going to submit for the record affordable housing. Thank you for the work that you're doing in Nevada around affordable housing. I would like to know, though, the most recent agreement that was entered into, and thank you, with HUD, is it working? and maybe we can have a follow-up on that. I know my time is up.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. That agreement happened because you asked me about it in my confirmation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Lee.
The Conservation and Landscape Health Rule that you recently finalized elevates non-use, either on par with or arguably above multiple use. Now, according to FLPMA, BLM is required to manage for multiple use and for sustained yield, with multiple use referring to things like grazing, timber harvesting, energy, mining, and recreation. Can you cite a provision of FLPMA that allows for you to depart from that standard and to prioritize non-use instead of multiple use and sustained yield? What provision of FLPMA allows you to do that?
Title I, Section 103 is where the multiple use definition occurs in FLPMA, and it is very explicitly clear that managing for fish and wildlife habitat, managing for natural and scenic values, those are direct words from FLPMA, is our responsibility. And
yeah, look, I understand that, and that's as part of the sort of the recreation portfolio, and you've got the ability to do that. I don't think there's anything in there though that authorizes you to do exactly what you're doing here, which really is for deliberate, long-term non-use. This is a frustration that I have, and it's not just me that has it. I hear every day, all the time, from constituents, from local officials, who are increasingly frustrated at the direction that BLM has taken under your lead. Now, keep in mind, the federal government owns 67% of the land in my state, and the biggest share of that is Bureau of Land Management. And so we live as subjects to the Bureau of Land Management. And increasingly, BLM, under your leadership, seems to have taken an approach that manages these lands like a museum. It's a you can look, but you cannot touch sort of approach. These are in people's backyards. You can hardly throw a rock in any direction in Utah and not hit federal land. Now, that portion of the land in my state, the portion of the 67% of the land in my state owned by the federal government, your portion of it amounts to 22 million acres in Utah. That's 7 million acres more than all of the land, not just the federal land, but all the land in the state of West Virginia. And month after month, a sweeping new policy or management plan seems to be imposed by your agency, harming Utahns who rely on the land for their livelihood, who rely on the land for all sorts of things. Now, the agency has strayed pretty far from its statutory mandate to manage this land for multiple use and sustained yield. The conservation rule is a pretty blatant example of this museum approach of you can look, but you can't touch, one that's taken over the BLM. And I don't think it can be fairly reconciled with FLPMA. Now, Neda Wolf-Culver currently serves as the Director of Policy and Programs at BLM. And as you know, Ms. Culver previously worked as Senior Counsel and Director of the BLM Action Center at the Wilderness Society. While in that position, Ms. Culver was personally involved in advocacy and litigation regarding travel management planning and route closures in Utah. And in fact, Ms. Culver helped negotiate the settlement agreement a few years ago between various environmental NGOs and the Obama administration that established the process and the timelines for updating Utah travel management plans. Last fall, BLM closed 317 miles of historic roads in Utah as part of the update to the Labyrinth, RIMS, Gemini Bridges travel management plan. Director Stone Manning, Ms. Culver reports to you in her current role as Deputy Director. So I'd like a yes or no answer on this. Did Ms. Culver have any involvement in the decision-making for the Labyrinth RIMS plan?
Principal Deputy Director Culver does report to me, and the Labyrinth Travel Management Plan decision came from the ground where it should come from. And it was a part of a legal settlement. We got sued and...
No, I get that, but that's
Yeah.
not my question. My question is whether she herself had any involvement in that.
Senator, decisions like that sometimes come to headquarters for review. I don't know if that particular plan came for review or not.
Okay, so, look, she either recused herself from that decision or she didn't. Which is it?
Senator, she worked for the Wilderness Society and was wildly competent in that job.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
Seven or eight.
That is not the subject of my question. What I want to know is, was she or was she not involved in that?
She does not have to recuse herself from the Wilderness Society. She is out of the recusal period.
Okay, so you're saying that it's okay for someone with a history of advocacy and litigation on these routes, not just routes like these, but on these specific routes. She was involved in litigation as an advocate specifically on these routes. Her name, I believe, is on the settlement, the consent decree documents that resulted in this process. You're saying that it's okay for her to do this and that she can impartially oversee the BLM's travel management planning in that area.
Senator, we adhere to high ethical standards at the department, and we've done so here.
All right.
Senator.
Can I ask one follow-up? I'll be quick.
Very quickly, please.
All right, look, your updated Western Solar Plan expands solar development on public lands. How are you going to ensure that the expansion doesn't disproportionately limit other critical land uses, things like recreation and wildlife conservation and grazing?
Yeah, Senator, you've hit the nail on the head on what we do every day, right, is balance all of those uses. And the Western Solar Plan is going to help us guide solar development to places so that those decisions become more durable. So we've got this programmatic look at where development should go so that when we do the individual NEPA analysis, it becomes more durable.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Great, and thank you for your service. Thanks for being here. I think we start with the public lands rule. And I, again, want to discuss its impact on the clean energy deployment, particularly at the state and local levels. Some clean energy advocates worry that the rule is going to hinder projects if it's not properly implemented, if we don't get the right framework in place. How well you collaborate with state and local officials to ensure we continue advancing clean energy. We get to those goals in clean energy on public lands.
Senator, thanks for that question. We work very closely with our partners in the states. The Fish and Game agencies are critical to our work, informing our work about where we should avoid developing and where it's okay to develop. I think the public lands rule is going to help renewable energy development in a couple ways. Again, it's going to make, now that we are assessing all of our work against land health standards, all of our work is going to be more durable. And the mitigation portion of the public lands rule that allows mitigation leasing on our public lands will give these energy development companies the ability to offset their impacts. And that kind of mitigation typically had been done on private ground, and now we have a consistent way to invest those dollars on our public ground. There's just great conservation success for mitigation, and now we get to see that success on public lands.
Great, thank you. Another issue, separate issue completely, we continue to be falling behind in securing critical minerals, essential minerals, the kinds of things we're going to need to really make a transition to a clean energy economy. Lithium, copper, I mean, we're going to need more copper than we've ever really imagined. And we're falling behind in securing supply chains for these minerals. And consistently, that's making us more and more vulnerable to our rivals like China that are investing more and making, and I think, setting up broader, larger supply chains. Given BLM's role in permitting and resource production on federal lands, how are you coordinating with the Department of Defense, for instance, or the Department of Energy to ensure reliable supply chains for our critical minerals and overall our energy security?
Senator, thanks for the question. One of the frustrations about the 1872 mining law is that we don't get to drive what kind of minerals we're going for and where. We react to proposals that come in the door. And I'm proud to say that we've permitted 5 critical mineral mines in this administration. We have another big one in the works at Rhyolite Ridge. The Thacker project is going forward, is going to produce probably 20% of the world's lithium supply. So we are working very hard to, again, get these projects done and again, make sure they're durable and stand the test of time.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's strange bedfellows in a way that people that really believe in protecting the environment recognize climate change and need to find ways to get minds open in order to protect the planet from severe change.
It's what I love about the BLM. The multiple use mission is hard, and it's why our employees are so excited to go to work every day, because they like hard things.
Gluttons for punishment, I might say.
Maybe.
Obviously, BLM offers access to the great outdoors on many different levels. In Colorado, it's just as you know, it's a really big deal, from hiking to mountain biking to fishing to all manner of outdoor recreation. Just on BLM lands alone, we have about $1.4 billion of economic activity, which is basically about 10% of our overall $14 billion economic activity on outdoor recreation in total. But along with the abundance of great trails in the BLM lands, there's also a major need to maintain these lands. And so how is your agency responding to the growing interest in BLM lands and this risk that people are going to love them to death?
Yeah, thank you for that question. 82 million people visited our public lands last year, a record. I think that they were rediscovered in the pandemic and folks aren't going back, which is a great thing, right? That people love their public lands they want to visit. I asked the team to put together a recreation blueprint for the 21st century to help guide our work. We haven't been seen as a recreation agency, but the American public sure sees us that way. And so we're trying to catch up using this recreation blueprint to then get some state implementation plans to help guide the work. Funding is an issue. For every visitor to Park Service lands, there's a $5.20 appropriated. For every visitor to Forest Service, it's about $1.70. For us, it's 79 cents. So we're doing a lot with a little, and that means we're going to have to create partnerships. Very excited about the Foundation for America's Public Lands that is helping us build those partnerships so that we can get the resources we need to take care of these lands.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Stone Manning, you've said that what BLM does every day is try to achieve balance, but yet in my state, in Alaska, it seems that you have abandoned any pretense of balance. Except for the reapproval of Willow following the law, we appreciate that. BLM is restricting development however and wherever it can. And we've seen this in our petroleum reserve, we've seen this in the 1002 area through the public land orders, the resource management plans, the rejection just recently of the Ambler Access Project. It feels like an onslaught to me, and it's not just me that's noticing this. It is other people who are making a joke out of it. It's not a joke. You see, they're putting sanctions on oil and gas production. Where? Iran, Venezuela? No, Alaska. It's a red state. It's a joke there, but it's not a joke back home. It's not a joke at all because it has direct consequences on our jobs, on our revenues. It hurts our energy, our mineral security. Despite the press releases coming out of the administration, it doesn't help the environment because what it's doing, it's helping to degrade global ecosystems by incentivizing foreign projects to move forward without the protections and the standards that we would have here. So I'm angry, I'm frustrated. You know that I've suggested that we need to clean house, we need to cut BLM's budget, at least until the agency realizes that they've got to follow federal law, that it actually matters, that the commitment to balance matters. So let me start my questions with something that we just learned about yesterday. And unfortunately, we didn't learn about it from BLM. We didn't learn about it from DOI. We learned about it from the governor's office, who asked for information from my office about what's the deal with PLO 5150. So you know very well what I'm talking about. BLM recently finalized its Central Yukon Resource Management Plan, its RMP, and as part of that, BLM decided not to lift PLO 5150 for the TAPS pipeline corridor. The state had selected this decades ago as part of its statehood entitlement. And by law, BLM is supposed to convey the selected lands in a timely manner. They hadn't been moving on it, so I passed a law 20 years ago. My law in 2004 directs BLM to lift PLOs in Alaska. And then in 2006, BLM recommends lifting PLOs on over 50 million acres and recommended that the best way to do that is through the RMP process. So we've got an RMP process. We got it for the Central Yukon. That's been going on for over a decade. And now what happens? BLM reverses course from the previous administration, refuses to lift PLO 5150 as part of its land planning process. Instead, they got a new promise here. What we're going to do is launch a new process with a tiered environmental assessment as soon as the Central Yukon plan was finished. And this is going to allow BLM to finalize the RMP and then move forward on a compromise for PLO 5150. And this was going to be a compromise developed by the state of Alaska that would protect subsistence and involve far less changing ownership. We didn't really think that that was perfect, but everyone that I knew of was willing to support it. BLM repeatedly, until like last week, told my office and Alaska DNR that they were going to do it. And so the state worked with the BLM for more than a year. And you're very well read into this because you drove the Dalton Highway last summer with the commissioner and the deputy commissioner. And then this week, we learned, nope, it's not happening. It's over. The plan is dead. The commitment is revoked. The Central Yukon RMP is over. It's done. There won't be a supplemental process to lift the outdated PLO for the pipeline corridor. I don't understand how you can sit here, how those in your department, all the way up to the secretary, can sit here and make these empty promises and then break them whenever you feel like you want to break them. And so I want to know, who canceled BLM's commitment to move forward on the state of Alaska's compromise on PLO 5150? And if it wasn't you, who was it?
Senator, I know that's really important to you. I know it's really important.
Yeah, it's really
to the
important, and we got zero word, zero, nothing. Is it happening?
I wouldn't call it canceled.
Okay, what would you call it?
My conversation with the commissioner last week was about how we're up against some timing issues and some workload issues throughout the department.
What does that mean?
And our plates are full, and that we're not moving forward with the EA in the timeline that we had originally
I don't
discussed.
understand what you have just said. Is the project canceled?
No.
Is the project delayed?
The EA is, I guess delay is
Is
the
the
right
project delayed for the duration of this administration, or are you continuing to work on it? Is it dead as far as your office is concerned?
Senator, no, it is not dead as far as my office is
Then what's happening?
As I was saying, our plates are full. I like to make sure that we get things done and
Who made this decision?
done well.
Who made the decision?
It was a collective decision about workload, which I always
Was it you? Was it someone at the department, or was it out of the White House itself?
It was a collective decision about workload with the department.
With the department, so the White House wasn't directing this?
Not that I know of.
Okay, I'm actually just stunned with your response here today. You knew we were going to have an opportunity to discuss this, and the fact that you can't give me really a straight answer as to where you are. Workload, give me a break. You've been working on this for 10 years. 10 years. And now you've come and you can't tell me whether or not it's canceled, it's delayed, if it's going to continue, if it's dead for the duration of this administration. My time is over, but I'm hopeful we have a second round.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to talk briefly about a bill that is really historic for Oregon, and that is the Malheur County Empowerment for the Oahe legislation. There has been gridlock on this issue for literally 50 years in my state. And now we've been able to bring together the ranchers and environmental folks. It's passed this committee. Senator Barrasso has given us valuable input, in terms of grazing flexibility, and we're very excited about what is at hand. And what we want to do is make sure, apropos of today, that issues like grazing, for example, is compatible with conservation objectives on the landscape. And I'd like to hear your thoughts with respect to the rule that you're talking about, because I'm particularly interested in getting input on how we keep building on this goodwill. In other words, it's not an accident that it's taken 50 years to get common ground. I mean, this is a very challenging area. People back east, for example, call this, Oregon's version of the Grand Canyon. My constituents call it home, and they want to have the ranchers and environmental folks get together. We've made a lot of headway. We continue to make more headway with respect to grazing flexibility. So tell us a little bit about how our approach fits in with what you all want to do, particularly on grazing.
Senator, thank you for the question. Grazing and conservation could and should and do go hand in hand. We're really clear about that in the preamble of the Public Lands Rule, that grazing done well is a tool for conservation. You and I have seen it on the ground. I have seen dry desert turn into riparian oases through grazing done well. And so we see our permittees across 155 million acres as partners in this work.
Will you commit this morning, because I think that what we're doing with grazing flexibility has a lot of potential. In other words, in my conversations with Senator Barrasso and other senators of both political parties, I said, we're trying to get our Oahe legislation passed, but we got a concept here that can be a winner in an area, again, where there's been intractable kind of gridlock. And, I look at what my ranchers say they want. They really just want some flexibility so that when they're doing good work, they're going after noxious weeds or something like that, they can have the flexibility to do it. So will you commit to working with the rural communities in my home state and in other states to make sure that we really look at ways to tie grazing and conservation and kind of other approaches so that there's flexibility for all users, and we don't operate under the assumption we're going to throw safety and environmental issues in the trash can. We're just getting some flexibility. Will you commit to working with rural communities in the days ahead in Oregon and elsewhere on getting that done?
Yes, Senator, I would be really pleased to do so. We do need those flexibilities.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Risch.
Ms. Stone Manning, we're going to talk today about the Lava Ridge project. You're familiar with it?
Yep.
Okay, that's good. I represent 1.8 million angry people, angry at you personally. And it isn't just the people of Idaho. We've got the legislature voted unanimously, House and Senate, objecting to this project, saying don't do it. We have the 7 Idaho counties that are affected unanimously adopting a resolution of disapproval, saying don't do it. Your own BLM Resource Advisory Council voted unanimously not to do this and said don't do this. The Shoshone-Bannock tribe submitted 2 comment letters in opposition to this project. The Friends of Minidoka Pilgrimage Planning Committee, and Japanese American Citizen League, who operate the sacred ground in there where they had a Japanese internment camp in World War II, said, don't do this. We don't want this. We are angry about this. And I want to put this anger for you into perspective that you will understand. You remember Previously, your foray with Idaho was engagement in a conspiracy to spike trees in the national forest in Idaho. You recall that after you did that, the people that were charged, that you testified against in return for an immunity agreement, went to prison over it. Idahoans were angry. They were angry with those people. They were angry with you. Now they're seeing the same thing out of you because none of them want the debauchement of this 100,000 acres with these 660-foot towers on it. So, do you understand how angry we are about this?
Senator, I can hear the anger in your voice, and I know that change is difficult. This wind proposal is big, but what we did do with your constituents was listen very hard, and the proposal now...
No, you didn't.
The proposal now is halved, and yet it will still provide energy for up to 500,000 homes, almost a gigawatt of power.
Where are those homes located? I'll tell you, California. You know that. You think that makes us happy? Why don't you put this project in California? If they need the energy so bad, do it down there. We don't want this project in Idaho. So I have a question for you. You did this, by the way, you were talking about the shortage of your manpower. You put out this 832-page environmental impact statement that's nothing but drivel. In the statement, you know what I can't find? Anybody who supports this from Idaho. Can you name somebody or some entity in Idaho that supports this project?
Senator, I have seen a couple hundred comments in support from
Compared to how many opposed?
I don't know the vote count.
I'll help you out.
Yeah.
It's in the tens of thousands. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants this. Can you name anybody or any entity that wants this?
Senator, the anger that you're talking about is of concern to me on the ground. I'm not going to rise to the rhetoric and name names.
So what are we going to do about this? With all the opposition from Idaho and us getting no benefit out of this whatsoever, what are we going to do about this? That you just set that aside and proceed on? Who wants this? Who is it that's pursuing this? Is it you?
Senator, we responded to an application from a company to develop public lands. It's what we do every day.
So it is a company that came forward and you're responding to them and ignoring 1.8 million people plus the entire establishment of our government in the state of Idaho. You're ignoring that for the company that came in and said, oh, here, we want to debauch 100,000 acres and put 241 windmills up on this land. That's how you're going to proceed.
Senator, the final EIS does call for that. The original proposal called for 400 turbines, and we listened to your constituents. We listened to...
You didn't hear any constituents say cut the 400 in half. Every constituent said, don't do this. So you didn't listen.
Senator, I hear the frustration and anger in your voice. We have issued the final environmental impact statement. It, of course, is not the final decision. That comes at the record of decision phase.
You know, I warned everyone when your confirmation was up, if you had someone who had such disrespect for the natural resources of America, for our country, and for my state, Idaho, this is what we were going to see. You ought to be ashamed. The administration ought to be ashamed. The Secretary of Interior ought to be ashamed. This is awful, awful, awful management of our public lands. It's not multiple use, it's abuse of our public lands. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hoven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, right now you're working on a draft resource management plan, RMP, for BLM lands in North Dakota. On that, you put out a preferred alternative that we have serious concerns about. Myself, Senator Kramer, Representative Armstrong sent a letter to you expressing those concerns, and I'd like Mr. Chairman to ask unanimous consent to make that letter a part of the record. Mr. Chairman?
Without objection.
Thank you. Essentially, this preferred alternative would close off new leasing to 45% of potential federal oil and gas acreage, and it would close off new leasing to 95% of federal coal acreage. Now, it's important to understand that in the grasslands, the BLM lands in North Dakota, you have a checkerboard issue. So it's a split estate ownership. So in a lot of cases where the federal government may own the surface acreage, they don't own the minerals. Those are privately owned by private individuals. So the net result is, because of the checkerboard on the surface and then the split estate ownership where the federal government may own the land but not the minerals underneath, by restricting this access, you are restricting private owners from accessing their property. You're disenfranchising them. In essence, a taking with no compensation. And so in this draft management plan, that's exactly what you're doing. You are stranding private owners' mineral rights and denying them their ability to receive very significant revenue for their minerals. So please explain to me how that is in any way reasonable or fair to do that under this type. I mean, how can you do that in a resource management plan and in any way, shape, or form believe that that is fair and equitable?
Senator, thanks for the question. A resource management plan, of course, is about land and mineral allocation. We've issued the draft. We are hearing the comments, and I look forward to reading your letter. I don't think I've seen it yet, but I will find it and read it.
Would you agree, though, for example, if you were the owner of whatever property rights and the federal government was preventing you from utilizing those in full compliance with the law, that would be an unfair taking?
Senator, I am not an attorney, but what I do know is...
But then just on the common sense and just common sense fairness. So, I mean, it's your neighbor. You restrict your neighbor from the use of his property arbitrarily. Is that a fair or a reasonable thing to do? Just in general.
Yeah, Senator, I hear your frustration. What we try to do is balance the laws and the objectives of the administration.
But the laws require multiple use on these federal lands. So whether it's this resource management plan or your recent April 18th rule regarding public lands, where you are now putting in place restoration or mitigation leases, okay, which lock away the ability for multiple use. Once you've put these mitigation leases in place, and we don't even know for how long, now that's limited to one use. That violates the law of multiple use. So on the one hand, you've got an unreasonable taking, and second, you're in violation of the law that requires multiple use. How can you go down that track and say that you're either being fair to people or complying with the law? You're doing this through executive fiat. You're not adhering to some new law. There was no law passed that suddenly said you can abrogate all fairness and former laws or laws on the books. There's nothing that says that. You just through executive fiat are blowing right by the absolute requirements of the law.
Senator, with respect, mitigation leases won't be single use.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. So you're going to allow farming, you're going to allow energy development, all those things on these mitigation leases?
So,
because I'd like to see that in writing, because that'll be great. I want to see that in writing from you.
It is in the rule that there are often overlapping uses in what we do. So, for example, there could be a grazing permittee who's got a grazing lease on a piece of ground. Mitigation company wants to come in and say, hey, I'd like to improve your grass. Can I work with you? Can we put a mitigation lease on this? They come to the BLM and say, we'd like to do a mitigation lease. And so those uses then become compatible. Transmission line across the section, for example, can be compatible with the increased production we're trying to get to through the mitigation.
We'll want those assurances from you in writing, and so we'll want you to come out and explain that to our ranchers and to our energy industry, to our tourism industry. We truly do have multiple use in compliance with the law, which benefits everybody. And we're going to want your commitment that that can continue.
It is exactly what the rule envisions.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, Mr. Chairman, I want to say thank you for your strong statement on the RICA legislation yesterday and for your leadership on this issue. It's much, much appreciated. Director Stone Manning, let me just start with this. When you came before this committee in 2021, this is before I was a member of the committee, you were asked as part of your confirmation whether you'd ever been investigated, arrested, charged by any federal, state, or local law enforcement authority for the violation of any federal, state, or local law, regulation, or ordinance other than a minor traffic offense. We asked that question of all people before the committee. You answered no. Do you stand by that testimony?
Senator, I do stand by that testimony and was proud to be confirmed to do this job.
What's tree spiking, Director?
Senator, again, this committee engaged quite a bit in
No,
this
that's a factual question. Do you know what it is?
And I do. It is.
Do you want
when-
to tell us? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's when people illegally put metal objects into trees so that they prevent a timber sale.
What happens if a chainsaw hits a spike?
Sometimes when a chainsaw hits a spike, it can buck the saw.
Yeah, violently recoil, potentially kill or seriously maim the loggers.
Yeah, which is why I notified the federal authorities that I had heard that that happened.
Loggers like, for instance, George Alexander, this is from an article on the Washington Post explaining what happens when trees get spiked. Loggers who are blue-collar workers, by the way, these are not wealthy people. These are not people who have had the advantages perhaps you and others have had. People like George Alexander, who, for example, in May 1987, at age 23, his chainsaw hit a tree spike. I'm quoting, his face was slashed from eye to chin, his teeth were smashed, his jaw was cut in half. That's a typical reaction when a logger hits a spike. Now, you just said, I think just a second ago, that you were involved. There were 2 people convicted in 1989 of putting 500 pounds of spikes in an Idaho forest. Senator Rich mentioned this just a moment ago. You testified you sent a letter to the Forest Service on their behalf. I have it here. The letter says, among other things, this letter sent to notify you that the post office sale, that's the forest sale in Idaho, has been spiked heavily. The reason for this action is that this piece of land is very special to the earth. It is home to the elk, deer, mountain lions, birds, and especially the trees. It goes on, I would be more than willing to pay you $1 for the sale, but you'd have to find me first, and that could be your worst nightmare. P.S. You bastards go in there anyway, and a lot of people could get hurt. Why'd you send this?
Senator, as I said at the time, over 30 years ago, a really angry and turns out violent person handed me that letter and said, will you send this to the Forest Service?
And you did. Why?
What you just talked about in 1987 to a logger, this is 1988, 9. I understood that people could get hurt.
Why didn't you notify the federal authorities? Why did you send this threatening letter on behalf of these 2 men who were convicted of crimes?
I was terrified of them and wanted no involvement with them.
So you wanted no involvement, but you sent a letter that says you bastards go in there anyway and a lot of people could get hurt? Why didn't you just contact the FBI or anybody, any local authority?
Because the person who did this act threatened people's lives if they disclosed who did it.
Yeah, in fact, you were investigated for being involved, weren't you? Here we have a letter sent to this committee from the special agent of the USDA Forest Service, Michael Merkley, who was in charge of the investigation. He says, and he details this in the letter to this committee, that he investigated you for your involvement. He says, and I'm going to quote now, grand jury subpoenas were issued for hair samples, handwriting exemplars, fingerprints. These subpoenas were served on persons suspected of being involved, having knowledge of the incident, including Ms. Tracy Stone Manning. You've testified you were never investigated, ever for anything. Why'd you lie to this committee?
Senator, this committee delved deeply, went into the court records where I testified against these men.
Were you issued subpoenas?
No.
You were not issued
Well,
subpoenas?
I was issued a subpoena to appear before a grand jury with.
Really?
With
Because
about 13
here's what he
people.
says. Ms. Stone Manning was extremely difficult to work with. She was antagonistic. She was uncooperative, refused to provide her handwriting exemplars and fingerprints as ordered by the grand jury. It was not until after we informed her she would be arrested if she did not comply with the subpoenas that she provided the samples to me. So you were subpoenaed.
Senator Hawley,
You
your
were
time
the
has
target of an
expired.
investigation.
Do you have a question?
You were the target of an investigation. You lied to this committee. Why?
Senator, I never received a target letter. I'm curious, I understand why this committee jumped over 30 years of my career in considering my nomination and went to a salacious moment from graduate school where I tried to protect people. What I don't understand is why we're not looking at the last 3.5 years now.
Here's why.
Senator
It's
Hawley.
because people are killed in these kind of incidents. It is an act of
Your
terrorism.
time is expired.
A special agent in charge found that you were involved. You lied to this committee in saying that you were never investigated.
Senator
you were never
Hawley.
the target of investigation. In fact, you were.
Your
You
time
lied to us
is
blatantly.
expired.
And you know it.
Senator Daines.
Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you. Director Stone Manning, I would like to talk about the last 3.5 years.
Great.
This is the first time you're in front of the committee since your nomination back in June of '21. Since then, your actions your agency has taken or failed to take have been devastating to Montana and our rural communities that depend on federal lands for their livelihoods. It's no secret that the Biden administration, the EPA, the Department of the Interior, and the BLM are doing everything they can to eliminate oil, eliminate gas, eliminate coal production in the United States. And if anybody doubts that, go to the whitehouse.gov website. You can see it says Stop LNG, Eliminate Fossil Fuels. At least they're public about it. Let me name just a few actions that impact Montana. On day one, President Biden cancels the Keystone XL pipeline, a gut punch to so many eastern Montana counties, 1 million barrels a day stopped by Joe Biden. Day one, Biden starts stopping oil and gas leasing on federal lands. And then we've had an onslaught of rules from the EPA. Methane rules targeting small oil and gas producers. The MATS and Clean Power Plant 2.0 that's targeting the Colstrip power plant. We are now on a path. 2 of our 4 Colstrip units have been shut down, power units. The last 2 now will be shut down unless these overreaches coming from the Biden administration are stopped. The Department of Energy stops, they said pause, good grief, they stopped LNG export permits. The Office of Surface Mining slow walks coal permits in Montana in hopes the mines will be forced to close down. And now to the BLM. The BLM has only held 2 oil and gas lease sales in Montana since Biden took office. This is under your watch. You're supposed to have at least 4 a year. BLM's new public lands rule seeks to sideline oil and gas production. BLM's new oil and gas leasing rule sets bonding requirements so high, our small producers can't keep up. And just last month, the BLM announced a proposed plan to eliminate coal leasing in Montana and Wyoming. Wyoming's the #1 coal producer. Montana has the most coal potential of any states in the United States. And these are just the tip of the iceberg. The Biden administration has one goal. It's radical. It's to end oil, gas, and coal production in the United States. And you aren't hiding it. Director Stone Manning, the proposed Miles City and Buffalo management plans seek to end all coal leasing in the Powder River Basin. This extreme proposal seeks to end leasing in the largest coal-producing area in the United States, where almost half of all the country's coal is produced, and where coal mines serve as a key driver of the economy and maintain strong support from local communities and leaders. What reasoning, besides simply being opposed to coal, does the BLM have for closing leasing on America's largest coal field?
Senator, the President has asked us to transition to a clean energy economy, free of carbon pollution by 2035, and economy-wide by 2050. Lands leased in the Miles City field office are leased through...
Do you agree with the President's goal on that? Is that the right goal?
I do.
So you think we should shut down oil and gas and coal?
I think we're at record production.
Should we shut down? I mean, you just told me you're trying to go to zero. Do you believe we should shut down oil, gas, and coal production in the United States?
I believe that we should become energy secure through.
You're not answering my question. You just said you want to go to zero carbon. If you agree with the Biden administration's objective and vision, I'm asking you, do you think we should shut down oil, gas, and coal?
If you can let me finish my sentence, I would say to you, I believe that we need to transition to a clean energy economy built on renewable energy, which will keep this country secure.
Okay, that's green speak. We just answer the question. Does that mean, by getting to that we shut down oil, gas, and coal?
We're going to use oil and gas and coal for decades through the transition, but ultimately.
But do you believe we should ultimately shut it down?
We need it through the transition.
But you believe we should shut it down?
I believe that we're going to need it through a transition to a clean energy economy.
You should go talk to the Germans about that vision, see how that's working out for them. Have you personally talked to Montana coal communities and the families who will be negatively affected by your proposed plan? Have you talked to the Montanans out there?
Senator, as you know, I had the honor of serving.
I know you did under Governor Bullock. I just want to know, have you talked to Montana families about this? Have you talked to the families impacted by the Keystone Pipeline being shut down? Have you been to Coal Strip and talked to the families out there that are scared to death of what's going on with the Biden administration and shutting down their livelihoods?
I have been in Coal Strip in front of 400 people when I was DEQ director.
No, wait, no. I know. How about as now you're a Fed? Have you been out there since you have been now implementing these policies to shut it down?
I have not spoken directly with families.
Okay. That's what I was asking.
Yeah. No.
Okay, I didn't think so, because if you did, you might get a little different view. You probably might get my view versus the view you're hearing from Joe Biden, which is so out of touch with where most Montanans are. The BLMs.
Senator Daines, your time's expired. I'm going to try to give everyone a second round.
Okay.
We're limited on time. I'm going to forego my second round of questions, but I would ask people to try to keep their questions to 3 minutes so that we can get through everyone who wants a second chance.
Thank you, Chairman.
Ranking Member Bross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stoneman, the Bureau has yet to issue leases to the winning bidders of the December 2020 oil and gas leases. So it's now 2024, 2020 to 2024. When do you plan to issue the leases?
Senator, thank you for that question. We are still working our way through multiple court decisions. When we issue them, we want them to be durable and stick.
Because, you know, the law requires you issue the leases within 60 days, and it's now been over 3.5 years. So when do you plan, give me a date, when you plan to issue these leases that by law should have been released?
Senator, I don't have a date for you at this time.
Okay. 3.5 years, long time. Again, we need a date. Next, in June of 2022, the Bureau settled a lawsuit related to oil and gas leases that it had issued between 2015 and 2020 in Wyoming. In that settlement, the Bureau agreed to update the environmental analysis of the leases. So the Bureau's Wyoming office, the state office in Wyoming of the Bureau of Land Management, says they finished updating exactly what you wanted last summer. Finished what you asked for last summer. So why is your Bureau not then released this updated analysis?
Senator, again, as I was mentioning, we are reconciling different court decisions and opinions throughout the West, and we want to make sure that we are consistent.
Well, it seems like a lot of foot dragging. The state officers can't issue the permits to drill on these leases, refuses to until the Bureau releases the updated analysis, which was now done which was done a year ago. So again, when will the Bureau release that analysis?
I'm sorry, which analysis?
The one that was done a year ago by the Bureau, Wyoming's Bureau of Land Management, based on the 2022 settlement.
Yeah, again, Senator, I don't have a date for you.
Yeah, well, we need a date. And this, you can see how every member of this side says this is a deliberate sabotage of American energy by an administration with this approach, which is a pipe dream about their view of when we can get to a carbon-free America. And as our hearing showed last week, Mr. Chairman, China's beaten us to this because they're putting all the energy into AI, and that puts us at a competitive world disadvantage. Final question, so we're trying to keep this under 3 minutes. So last weekend, I was at the Wyoming Stock Growers Summer Convention in Douglas. A number of folks expressed concern about the process by which your Bureau considers public comments. Does the Bureau require individuals who submit public comments to identify who they are and where they are from?
Senator, I believe that is the case. And if I could revisit your last question, I don't think it's sabotage to be at record production highs for oil and to issue 11,000 APDs.
It's a sabotage of public land use of the multiple use of the lands on public land. Well, so this is the question, getting with the question at front right now. So someone from a country like China or Russia or a computer which doesn't want us to develop our energy or our mineral resources, are they allowed to submit public comments? Is that correct? Because that's what we're hearing. The answer is yes.
Yeah, I assume they are.
It is,
yeah.
yeah, so they, can the Bureau even determine then whether a comment has submitted by a human or by a machine? The answer is no, you can't. In light of all this, shouldn't the Bureau give the most weight to comments from the people and the communities who actually live, as my friend and colleague just said, of what's happening in Idaho and what's happening, who actually live and most affected by the proposals?
You might have suggested that your colleague has bots putting in comments. I don't think that's true. We read the comments very thoroughly. I think that we can tell when it's a bot and when it's a Russian and when it's an actual Idahoan, as the case is with what we got from the lava project. I don't understand what you're getting at, Senator.
We're getting at the fact that it seems that the comments coming in and are being counted as equal are those that have been in the land for 5 generations and those coming from communist China. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murkowski.
Mr. Chairman, let me just try to wrap up where we were with PL 5150. Do you have any idea the cost of the process, what it took to get to the draft RMP EIS?
For the Central Yukon?
Yes.
I don't. It's in the millions of dollars, but I don't have the draft figure.
The 2020 draft RMP EIS cost the BLM a little over $5 million to produce. The final RMP EIS document says that it cost the lead agency, BLM, $6.7 million to produce. To kind of put that into perspective, the FY25 budget requests $28.8 million for the entire Alaska conveyance account. So you can see my frustration here. You've spent somewhere between $5 and $6 million of a $28 million entire budget, 10 years, and have gotten nowhere. And what you've told me is you have a manpower issue, which makes no sense to me that you would invest this money, invest this time, and then say, well, later. You made a commitment to me when you were before this committee 3 years ago, and you said, you have my commitment that I understand the job is to follow the law and that the federal government has commitments to the state of Alaska. You acknowledge those commitments to the state of Alaska. You know very well the Alaska Land Transfer Acceleration Act because I asked you about it then. I mentioned the report in 2009, the updated report in 2019, finding that the lifting of the vast majority of these withdrawals for the PLOs would be, quote, consistent with the protection of the public interests in these lands. Approximately 95% of these withdrawals would be that could be lifted are consistent with the protections of the public's interest. So you've got these findings, you've got the recommendation. I don't understand how the recommendation within the Central Yukon RMP to not lift any of the public land orders in that area is consistent with the act, consistent with your commitment to me that says, I get it, I know that the federal government has commitments to the state of Alaska, they're outlined in the law, and then 10 years, millions of dollars, and never mind, because that's where we're feeling like we are right now.
Senator, I'm going to get back for the record for you the budget question. It's my understanding that the Central Yukon RMP budget came out of our planning budget, not the conveyance budget.
So whether it came out of the conveyance budget or the planning budget, you've spent millions of dollars, 10 years, and you've gotten nowhere. The last thing that I would like from you is in her hearing on May 8th, Secretary Holland was before this committee, and in response to me, on the Ambler Road, she promised that she would, quote, be happy to follow up with me on specific legal justifications. I asked the Secretary to provide, to make clear where it says that the access is superseded, Ambler's access is superseded by general right-of-way authorities for BLM provided by FLPMA. So as a lawyer, I looked at that and said, that makes no sense to me. So I asked her, give me the specific legal justification. She said, happy to follow up. That was over a month ago. Can you give me that analysis that the Secretary promised?
Senator, the legal underpinnings, especially on our 810 requirements under ANILCA for subsistence, are going to be outlined and documented in the record of decision, which is forthcoming.
Well, it seems to me that when I asked the Secretary and she says, I will be happy to follow up with me on specific legal justifications, I don't feel like I should have to wait until I get a final record of decision to understand that. I think I had a commitment from the Secretary, as I think I had a commitment from you 3 years ago, and I don't think that either one of you are following up on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Risch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I can see you're a little aggravated that we're after you for something that happened quite some time ago. But I want you to know that that ecoterrorism is so bad that when someone commits that, they certainly ought to be disqualified from management of public resources. That's why we're angry about this. Now, Senator Hawley wasn't here, but I was here when you had your hearing. And you didn't tell us anything about that. You swore that you had never been investigated. And you knew better than that. In fact, you had an attorney. That attorney negotiated an immunity agreement so that you wouldn't go to prison. Isn't that true? Yeah, it's a yes or no, ma'am.
Senator, I never received a letter saying I was under investigation. That was the question. There
was never a question about whether you received a letter that you were under investigation. The question that was asked to you was, have you ever been under investigation? And you knew you were under investigation. We were never able to cross-examine you on this. And as a matter of fact, after that, when it came to light, we started sending letters asking questions about it, and you wouldn't answer those letters. And you wound up getting confirmed on a party line vote, of course.
Senator, all of this came out also in my Senate confirmation at the state of Montana, where we went into great depth about...
Don't know anything about the state of Montana. I'm talking about sitting right here looking like this, where you were trying to become the head of the Bureau of Land Management. Let me say something else that really troubles me, is the lack of remorse of your involvement in this. You're saying, oh, I was handed a letter and I had to send it because I was scared. The investigation had things very different than that. There's a statement in there by the investigator that says Stone Manning, quote, was an active member of the original group that planned the spiking. There is a quote in here from a witness who overheard you. She said that she had overheard, we're in a conversation where Ms. Stone Manning, along with other co-conspirators, planned the tree spiking and discussed whether to use the ceramic or metal spikes in the trees. We all know how important that is, whether you use metal or ceramic. Lastly, the ringleader of the whole thing, Mr. Blunt, said after your hearing, and you said, oh, well, you know, I didn't know anything about this till he handed me the letter. He said, this is the ringleader of your conspiracy, said, quote, she knew about it far in advance, a couple of months before. So your lack of remorse here is despicable, to be honest with you.
Senator, I have to say for the record, none of what you just said is true.
Well, somebody sure thought it was.
Did
you sign an immunity agreement?
I actually couldn't tell you the difference between a ceramic and a metal spike. I actually don't know the difference.
Well, the difference, as you know, is when they go through the mill, they're x-rayed, and if there's metal in it, they'll be able to kick it out. If you put a ceramic spike in, they'll never pick it up, and it'll kill mill workers. That's the difference between ceramic and metal, and they overheard you having this conversation with someone else. Look, I can't tell you how deeply disappointed I am, not only in what you've done. You wanted us to look at the last 3.5 years. The last 3.5 years has been a disgrace, as you've heard here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Dates.
Chairman, thank you. I want to talk about the bonding. The BLM's most recent oil and gas leasing rule increases the minimum lease bonds from $10,000 to $150,000. It's a radical change. disregards the cost to reclaim a Montana well. It punishes the small, family-owned oil and gas producers in our state. Simply put, Montana's oil and gas producers can't afford a 1,500% increase in bonding. Did you talk to Montana producers on how this new rule affects them?
Senator, first I'll start with
That's a simple question. Did you speak directly with any Montana producers on how this rule would affect them?
I've spoke with the Western Energy Association, and I think there was Montana producers in the room, but I can't remember.
You can't think of a Montana producer you spoke to, because I tell you, they would have given you an earful on this, because they're giving me an earful on them.
So the bonding rates have not been raised in over 50 years. The GAO and the Inspector General both advised that we do so to protect the American taxpayer.
But do you think it might be good, maybe go out to Montana and ask the producers what a 1,500% increase might do to these small producers?
Well, we did that in a draft comment period. That's what it's for.
But it's helpful to go talk to the people that are going to be affected. It's just a good lesson in life. I want to talk about what's going on with grazing. The grazing on federal lands provides billions of dollars each year in ecosystem services. Your agency feels the need to attempt to separate grazing from other conservation values. Do you believe that grazing provides a conservation benefit?
I do.
You do. Great. Will you commit to ensuring that the implementation of the public lands rule will not push Montana ranchers off their BLM grazing allotments?
Senator, in no way does the public lands rule envision that.
So if you see any of that, would you confront it and say we've got to change something here so we're not pushing grazing activities off of BLM lands?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Areas of critical environmental concern are public lands where special management is needed to protect unique resources and scenic landscapes to protect from hazards. I've got a question. They've put these implementations, these restrictions on land while waiting for a formal change to land use plans. What public input would be required prior to these restrictions being put in place?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of that.
So it's the areas of critical environmental concern? Right. So what input's required before putting these restrictions in place, do you think?
As you know, areas of critical environmental concern are only designated through management plans. And management plans last decades in some cases. If somebody brings us a nomination for an ACEC, something arises that we need to address. We look at the relevance and importance criteria, as FLIPMA tells us to do. If we find that it meets that criteria, that it's relevant and important and requires specific management, we can put that temporary management into place until we get into the next planning period.
One follow-up question, Mr. Chairman, then I'll be finished. Back on the increase here in the bonding, would you meet with some of my Montana producers so you can hear firsthand from them?
I would love to.
Okay, I'd love to set that up. So if you commit to that, we will get the Montana producers because I think you're going to hear a 1,500% increase all at once here is something that is going to be very detrimental here back home in Montana. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you to our witness. Members will have until close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record, and this committee stands adjourned.